And we're live, Theo. Welcome back, everybody, to First Class Fantasy. I am your co-host, Billy Musio. With me, as always, Theo Grimminger. We're about to dive into the recent free agency news, as well as our best ball draft that is happening right now over at FFPC. Theo, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's March Madness out there, so appreciate people tuning in. There's a lot of basketball going on, and a lot of it's always intense. It's always great the first couple days, but we've also got a lot of madness going on in the NFL right now. It's just every single day is a signing or a trade. There's been a lot of news that's going to cause us to react to our rankings and also the way that we approach certain positions. So I'm excited to talk to you today, Billy.
Yeah, just speaking of rankings, I've been updating them daily with the news over at Player Profiler. So the best ball rankings are updated as of this morning. None of today's free agency news is updated. So what I've been doing for everyone who's participating, taking a look at those, is you can head on over to Player Profiler, go to the rankings of your choice, and then I update them at night, given all the news that we have for the day, and update them. The site gets loaded for the morning, and then you have the previous day's news in there. So as news breaks today, I'll get that updated tonight, and you'll have live up-to-date information over at the Player Profiler rankings.
No, the FFPC rankings up there just look awesome. A lot of work you put in on that, and it's definitely going to be a benefit for anybody who plays in the FFPC, or if anybody plays in tight end premium formats that are not the FFPC, these rankings are definitely going to help you out. So get with Player Profiler. We are going to be the place to be for the FFPC player this season.
That's right. Well, Theo, let's dive into some of these free agent signings.
Yeah, so before we talk free agent signings, we had a very, very big trade go down. The New York Giants traded for Darren Waller. This is exciting, and this was kind of out of left field. We've heard for weeks and weeks about how the New York Giants are going to be very active in the wide receiver market. We never really thought of Waller as a guy that they would target, but I got to like it. I like it for the Giants, and I like it for Darren Waller, not only in redraft this year, but I like it for his 2-year window in Dynasty. I think it's an exciting landing spot for him because he ends up on a team where he can lead the team in targets. I think he was not going to see that in Las Vegas, but in New York, it's certainly in the range of outcomes.
I love this. I love this trade. When I was, trying to compile the projections together, taking a look at, the matrix and trying to solve the puzzle, there was a lot of uncertainty at who was going to be catching the ball this year, right? And as soon as that trade happened, Waller immediately moved up my rankings. I was notably a little, maybe I don't want to say I was, too low on Waller when he was with Las Vegas, but I wasn't necessarily liking the situation and how it was shaping up to be. Now, honestly, I'm going to be honest with you. I have Darren Waller ahead of Kyle Pitts. Waller comes in my rankings as tight end number 7. I have him just behind Freiermuth, a couple points behind Freiermuth, and I have him about just about 20 points behind Dallas Goedert, and I have him about a half a dozen points ahead of Kyle Pitts. So I love the move for Darren Waller. I think it's going to be good for his fantasy outlook for 2023. I have him projected for roughly 19% target share, and it's going to be roughly 90 plus targets.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it. He's right in that mix of those tight ends that are not Travis Kelce, but they're impactful guys that can kind of move the needle for our fantasy teams. They're like guys that could potentially get up to that 15 points per game in regular PPR range. A few good things are going to happen for him. I think the touchdowns are going to have to be there for him to really have a smash season. And I do think that there's a chance that he sees more than those 90 targets. I think that there's a possibility that he could get up, well in the over 100 range. But you're giving him 90 is kind of a realistic one. I could take a bullish approach just because he's very different than the other receivers on the team. I expect that Isaiah Hodgins is going to have a role. They signed Paris Campbell to a tiny contract. Wan'Dale Robinson should be healthy, and they might add another receiver. But Waller, we've already seen him have 2 90-plus catch seasons in his career. The last one was back in 2020. 2021 was a kind of a nightmare for FFPC drafters. If you can recall, Waller at the 10 overall spot was kind of like a popular pick in main event drafts. A lot of people fell on that knife. He still was tight end 5 in points per game that season. So he's always putting up the numbers. And I also think what's interesting is we haven't seen Brian Daboll have a player like this, like a move tight end that's highly targeted. What are your thoughts of how Daboll's going to utilize him? And it's kind of different because we saw like Dawson Knox have that one season where he was like a top 10 tight end, but it was all touchdowns. It was not targets. You think he's going to line them up all over the field?
I think that Waller's going to be lined up all over the field. I would not be surprised to see him line up in the X role at times, and for him to be utilized in a wide variety of fashions. Because you take a look at this wide receiver corps, and it leaves a lot to be desired. So they re-signed Isaiah Hodgins, right, who is, in my opinion, is slotted to be the number one as of today. I know there's a lot of free agent rumors swirling around about McCole Hardman, about, them trying to get Odell Beckham still. There's a lot of uncertainty in what their plans are to do at the position. But they re-signed Sterling Shepard, who's coming off a major injury. They have Wan'Dale Robinson still, who's coming off a major injury. Darius Slayton there, who's kind of a one-trick burner. Outside of that, that's about it right now, Theo. So that leaves Darren Waller for, like I said, roughly 19% of the target share. I lied. It's 102.5 targets is my projection. So just over 100. And so I think that this really opens up a lot of opportunities for Waller. I think they're going to get creative with him, and I think that he's going to make a major fantasy impact with year two with Daboll in this offense and year two with Daboll and Jones together. They wanted to give Jones some weapons in order to produce, and I think they did that by going out and getting Darren Waller.
Yeah, so we're both on Waller. We both like the landing spot. The other side of the coin is the Raiders that morning, before we even found out about Darren Waller being moved, Jakobi Meyers signed with Las Vegas. Thoughts on Jakobi Meyers, and then thoughts about his replacement, Juju Smith-Schuster. Billy, which one of those two players scores more fantasy points in 2023?
Projections, I have them back to back. They're separated by literally half of a fantasy point. This is a coin flip, in my opinion. It's a lateral move for Jakobi Meyers, in my opinion. He only went up one spot inside of the projections and rankings. And then Juju climbed a bit just because now, again, necessity. We look at what New England has. Again, another team that is probably bottom two, maybe bottom of the entire league in skill positions. And I think that Juju coming in, even though he had a lackluster 2022 with the Chiefs, there was times in which he flashed. Injuries, of course, down the stretch derailed his 2022 campaign, and at least from an efficiency metric. I still think that Juju, however, will be given the opportunity inside New England from a pure volume standpoint. And what that equates to is to be determined, but I have them back to back in my rankings.
Yeah, I figured they were close, and I actually texted Billy because I wrote a Darren Waller piece with a part of it was Meyers, and I'm like, Billy, how many targets are we getting for Meyers? I guessed like 120. Am I close to your projection
for Jakobi Meyers?
Yeah,
I have the projections pulled up. Let me pull it up. So let's head on over to the AFC West. Let's scroll on down. And for Jakobi Meyers, there's the Raiders. What was your guess?
I guessed like 120.
109.8 is what I have. So very close.
Okay. So it's interesting because like Josh McDaniels, we heard the whole narrative that he's going to turn Hunter Renfroe into this Julian Edelman, Wes Welker guy. There was even, and I talked about this with Matt and Alan the other day on the Sonic Truth Pod, about how there was even like a small narrative that Davante Adams would not see his usual target number because of Renfroe. Renfroe and McDaniels never clicked. It just never happened. But now you get Jakobi Meyers, who has familiarity with McDaniels and kind of chooses his landing spot, ends up in Las Vegas. I kind of like it for Meyers because I think that they have a plan for him. Whether or not this whole, let's sign all these former Patriots plan works for McDaniels, I do think that he's got a plan to use Meyers a lot. We saw Davante Adams have like a ridiculous, like 32% target share last year. But I think that if Meyers, with the Waller trade, I think they're going to go to more 3-wide sets. And I think you're going to see, potential for like 120 targets and, a 20+% target share for Meyers. He's interesting. And I think that he's going to kind of further like dust Renfroe in terms of like the pecking order. I think it's going to be a very easy team to predict week to week, which we like for fantasy. Davante Adams, Jakobi Meyers, Josh Jacobs, and then a little bit of Renfroe. I think that's what we're going to see. So it's interesting. If I had to pick which one leads the leads each other in fantasy points, I don't know. I might go Myers. The Smith-Schuster signing seems like one of these Belichick ones where it's like Belichick, all of a sudden falls in love with a player a few years back and like keeps it into the back of his mind that, hey, I'm going to sign this guy at some point. Belichick is one of these guys he thinks he can kind of fix everything and kind of get the best out of players, and he has at many points of his career. But I don't know. Smith-Schuster did not look that great to me. I think they're going to give him an opportunity. Let's see what they do in the NFL draft. But neither one of those guys is going to win people fantasy championships. It's just a little bit interesting to kind of look at which one has a better year because of it's called almost like a trading spots in terms of happening and the timing of it.
Yeah, I'm projecting Jakobi Meyers to finish ahead of Hunter Renfroe as of right now. A lot of this is going to be dependent upon touchdowns, which is the most variable statistic inside of football, and being able to project that on a season-to-season basis is a lot easier than being able to project it on a week-to-week basis. That being said, I don't think that they go out and get a guy like Jakobi Meyers unless they plan on utilizing him. And then we both know that they are now down a big tight end, and I agree with what you say about them using more 3 wide receiver sets.
Yeah, it'll be interesting for sure. Running back wise, we had a ton of movement, and it's actually they've been pretty exciting landing spots. There hasn't been so far a landing spot where we're just like, ugh, that one is terrible. I think that DeAndre Swift, managers, it was kind of a tough one to see, but the one we want to talk about first was actually a guy that didn't get a whole lot of money, but there's been a massive amount of buzz. Rashaad Penney gets like a $600,000 contract to sign with the Philadelphia Eagles. So basically, do you see Penney in like the Sanders role, or do you see more of a split where your guy, Kenny Gainwell, kind of splits the usage with Penney, and then you'll have a little sprinkling in of Boston Scott, who also re-signed?
So just talked about this on the podcast earlier with Dave Richards from CBS Sports. That will go live, by the way, tomorrow for the Dominator. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. So I'm going to kind of echo that conversation because we literally just had it. Without giving that away too much, I would like to say that I do have Penney ranked ahead of Gainwell. I was already bullish on Gainwell to begin with. However, I don't think that this is going to eat into how I perceive this role to break down. I still think that Gainwell is a complementary piece. He was definitely used a lot more down the stretch and into playoffs, and especially in the red zone. But he just doesn't have the frame or the size to be able to handle 200 plus carries in a given season. Penney, though, as we know, is not necessarily the model of consistency for health himself, and body breaks down as well. So Dave had a great point, and he mentioned that he doesn't think that they're done signing running backs. When we look at this contract, it was $1.35 million on a 1-year deal for Rachaad Penney, only $600,000 in guaranteed money. The contract does have $2.1 million max value with incentives there that are laced in. So I definitely think that Penney has the talent to be a top 24 back. He comes in as running back 29 in my rankings right now. And I think that he definitely has the talent to succeed. We're going back to 2021. We saw the stretch that he had down the end where he actually finished as the RB1 fantasy points from week 14 through week 17. He was on just a heater. Gainwell, looking at this backfield in a duo and tandem, because Philadelphia never gives one back the full workload. They are notoriously known for having a rotation inside the backfield. Gainwell, in my opinion, still is going to maintain that third down role, going to be inside red zone packages, and of course be mixed in on 1 and 2 downs. I have Gainwell, I think, is RB36 inside the rankings. Again, you head over to playerprofiler.com and take a look at those rankings right now. But I definitely think that it did not affect Gainwell to some degree, as others have seen move down their rankings. Gainwell remains about the same for me.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And And I think that you bring up the fact that they might add another running back. I think people are kind of pushing that to the side as a possibility, and I think that's kind of the wrong process. They don't have hardly any money invested in these three together. It's such a low investment. They have lost a number of players on the defensive side of the ball. So I do think that the chances of them adding like Bijan Robinson in the first round are probably heading out the window. I think they really do need to address the defensive side of the ball, at least in that first round. But adding another running back in the draft, and I think there's also a chance that one of these veterans is not going to sign, and they're going to have an opportunity to get a guy who's been productive in his career for cheap and just add him and see where the chips fall, like in training camp. You know, a guy like a Damian Harris, a guy like even like an Ezekiel Elliott, a Leonard Fournette. Somebody might end up in Philly that we're not expecting for cheap, kind of chasing that Super Bowl ring, that might throw kind of a wrench into these plans. But it's easy to get excited about Penney. You know, everybody remembers how much money he made people in 2021. You brought up the RB1 overall. It was like a miracle run. And then last year when he got injured, he ended up having like a really solid game or two where he had just a tremendous week. I think the week before he went down. So that was, and he was also running ahead of Ken Walker. You know, and Seattle ended up getting a ton out of the rookie, but Penney was good enough to keep him on the bench and keep him, you know, his snaps down. So Penney's definitely, if he's healthy, he's interesting. It's really a nice bet by Penney to kind of bet on himself to get on a top-notch offense. I'm interested to see how it kind of shakes out. And I do think from our best ball perspective, being able to draft Penney and Gainwell on the same build is interesting. Is that an approach you might take?
Absolutely. Like I did it in a best ball draft through playoffs as well. And I comboed this backfield. I had all three. I had Miles Sanders, I had Gainwell, and Boston Scott, just because we know they're going to rotate these backs in and out. And I think from a best ball perspective, I think that works. And I think you're going to want to have a combination of these two, or at least shares of both of them. I would like to see at least some level inside of your ownership and diversification where you own both of them, because it is going to rotate from week to week. But I don't think people understand or realize just how good Rashaad Penny has been when he has been healthy and on the field. I know that is the big if and kind of the Achilles heel to Penny is, of course, his health. But 2021, 119 carries, 749 yards. He averaged 6.3 yards per carry, Theo. Yes, limited sample size. But then we get to 2022 and even a smaller sample size, but very similar results. 57 rushing attempts, 346 rushing yards, 6.1 yards per carry. You mentioned his big game. That was against Detroit in week 4. He had 157 total yards and 2 scores. He was the running back number 4 that week. We know that Penney is a very talented individual. He's very tantalizing, though, because we see these glimpses and we want to see more, but it just always seems to be some sort of lower body extremity that's keeping him off the field. We saw a tibia fracture in 2022. We saw a groin strain in 2022, hamstring in 2021, calf strain in 2021, knee in preseason in 2021. I mean, that's just, you know, a couple of the injuries in the last couple of years. If you could see the Christmas tree over at Player Profiler in the injury section, his whole lower half of his body is lit up like a Christmas tree. And so we have to understand, when we draft Rashaad Penny, we're going to get X number of weeks from him. And what that is to be determined, but it's safe to say that it might only be a few months of the year.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun one, and it's easy to remember that he was also a first-round pick, and he did it out of the Mountain West, which just hardly ever happens for running backs. But the running back leaving Philadelphia, I actually am excited about the Miles Sanders landing spot. I'm not sure about you. I know that you drafted a lot of Sanders last year when he was inexpensive in some of these higher stakes drafts, and you were spot on with it. I think this year his ADP will be a little bit higher. But the thing that I like about him signing with Carolina is I think he has an opportunity to be used as a receiver again. We're talking about a guy in Miles Sanders who had a 50-catch season as a rookie. He saw 60-plus targets as a rookie in Philadelphia. He ended up steaming up where he was a late first-round pick, early second-round pick as a sophomore, because people loved his two-way ability and projected him as the kind of guy that could put up a huge fantasy season. the last 3 seasons, we have not seen him be used as a receiver. His catch totals have been in like the 20s, but he has that in his profile coming out of Penn State that he was a two-way back. I think Carolina, based on the lack of weapons, I think that he could end up being utilized a little bit more in the passing game, which I think is exciting. Even though it's a worse offense by all counts and a team that could struggle to put up points at times, I think there's a chance that Miles Sanders has the most volume he's ever had in his career, and he gets back to his rookie season in terms of pass catching. What are your thoughts on Miles Sanders ending up in Carolina?
So you touched base on a lot of different points that I'd like to address. One, just kind of piggybacking off the tail end there, you talked about his opportunity to gain more target share. And I think this goes hand in hand with the offenses that he was on. He lost target share, in my opinion, inside of Philly because they had a positive game script last year, right? It was number one game script for all running backs in the league. At a 4.21 last year. They were, completing drives. They were finishing drives. They were scoring touchdowns. They were getting ahead and they were running the ball. And that's what we saw. 259 attempts last year was by far a career high for him. Prior to that, 137 attempts, 164 attempts, 179 attempts. When we talk about the motion of physics, what goes up must come down. So rushing attempts go up. His receiving share and his receptions and his target share were bound to come down. And so I think from a logical standpoint, when we look at the landing spot in Carolina, you hit the hammer on the nail. We talk about the lack of weapons inside Carolina. You take a look at this receiving core, and there's a lot left to be desired. Terrace Marshall right now projects to be the number one wide receiver. Shi Smith is in the mix here as the number 2/3. Laviska Shenault is now the 2/3. Outside of that, Hayden Hurst was just signed in free agency. And that's it. I mean, they still have Chuba Hubbard in this backfield as well, who projects to be involved on third downs. But we saw, even as bad as this offense was last year, we saw them commit to the run, and we saw them utilize Chuba and Donta Foreman last year. In my opinion, Miles Sanders is a far superior running back than Donta Foreman, especially at this point in their careers. I don't think that Chuba is good enough to necessarily eat into Miles Sanders' share as much as they did with Donta Foreman. I still think Chuba's involved, but I don't think it's going to be that 50-50 split that we saw with him and Foreman on the field. I think that Miles Sanders takes a pretty commanding lead in rush share in this backfield, like 10% plus more than Chuba. And I still think that we see Miles Sanders, with more target share than Chuba Hubbard as well. So my concern, though, is we look at the coaching changes that they've made, and we now have Deuce Staley, who is the running back coach over here in Carolina now, who just left the Lions, and we saw how that broke down inside of this backfield with Swift and Jamaal Williams. So I definitely have concerns when it comes to this backfield in general with this offense, but I think overall, I think that this offense is going to be a little bit better than it was last year. I think they've made enough changes, but I definitely think that there's still a lot of concerns with this offense. Theo, you back?
To me, it's interesting, and I'm not sure. You bring up some interesting points. If Foreman comes back, then maybe I would not be quite as bullish on Sanders. But I'm not a huge Hubbard fan, and I think that was the previous coaching staff that drafted him. So I won't let him kind of influence, my opinions on Sanders. And we also have the fact that at the NFL draft, they could add a guy that could really cut into his usage. But yeah, he could have landed far worse, which is something pretty exciting, and there's something to be said for that. One other running back that signed that was kind of out of left field was David Montgomery signing with Detroit. Detroit goes and gets a running back from in the division. I never like seeing that, especially when I'm trying to make a bull case for DeAndre Swift. Montgomery is a guy that has caught plenty of passes, which is something that nobody really talks about in his career. He's caught plenty of passes. last year he actually had his most yards per catch. The obviously the passing volume was low in Chicago, but he was a very efficient receiver. So you basically get away from Jamaal Williams. You replace him with a back who has caught a lot more passes over the past 2 seasons. This does not bode that well for DeAndre Swift, in my opinion. You can make a case that DeAndre Swift can do great on, 10 to 15 touches a game. Maybe they utilize him as a receiver, but it's hard for me to get really excited right now with the presence of David Montgomery.
Yeah, I think the signing is not necessarily great for DeAndre Swift, but I also don't think it's necessarily that bad. Swift definitely moved down in my rankings. Nonetheless, you have to like what this offense is doing, or this team is doing in general. They're going to become more efficient. They're going to be able to extend drives. They're going to have more chances. They're going to produce more plays. I think that we can look at some of these, positive regression efficiencies and say that it might balance out with the addition of David Montgomery. I definitely don't think that DeAndre Swift is going to be a 200 touch guy. I think Montgomery probably does see 200 touches. But DeAndre Swift is going to be making his money in the passing game. DJ Chark is on his way out of Detroit. They still have Jamison Williams. They still have Amon-Ra St. Brown. They don't really have a tight end as of today. So there's going to be lots of passing opportunity for Swift and for him to kind of, make his money in the passing game. So I definitely think there's still a route to success for DeAndre Swift. And I think that he has the overall talent to be the RB1 in the league. And I'll say it right now. Yes, DeAndre Swift has the talent to be the RB1 in the league, but he has not been given the opportunity enough to support that. And I think that we're looking at another year where it's going to look like to be the same. I do have David Montgomery inside my top 24 now. And so I like the signing. I think it's good for Montgomery and his outlook for 2023. And I've never been a huge Montgomery stan, but I do like the landing spot.
Yeah, the Swift has never averaged less than 13 points per game in PPR. It's very frustrating. You bring up his talent. It's the kind of guy that we as fantasy players get very excited about because he does flash that impressive talent. We just keep wanting more and more volume. And this one, was very disappointing. I think there was the Jamaal Williams kind of argument last year where all those runs inside of the 5-yard line, all those runs from the 1-yard line, maybe Detroit just, regresses to the mean and has less goal line attempts and Swift sees more receiving opportunity. It creates a scenario where DeAndre Swift becomes more of a value in terms of redraft ADP. He's certainly a value in Dynasty right now. People are trying to get out from under him, but it's definitely an interesting one to see where that lands. We thought with Deuce Staley out of there, we're going to get a DeAndre Swift volume bump up, but now it looks like they kind of have the same plans of a split backfield. So we'll see what happens in Detroit. I think Detroit will score a lot of points this year, which is exciting for both players. One running back that is out is Zeke Elliott in Dallas. They're finally moving on from him. This is something that we've been wanting for years. Tony Pollard is going to be an ADP rocket ship. He's got to dodge some bullets in the NFL draft. There's maybe a few free agents that could kind of hurt him a little bit, but right now he's definitely heading up. How excited are you about Tony Pollard?
I love Tony Pollard. I've liked Tony Pollard forever. I've always been a Tony Pollard stan. Them releasing Zeke does not change my projections that much with Pollard. Like, one would think that the release of a running back with 180 to 220 carries would catapult someone up the rankings. He moved up 2 to 3 spots in my rankings with the news because I do think that position is addressed in the draft. Bijan is a name to watch out for, right? There's a lot of different names that are going to be able to be utilized on this team in the same regard that Zeke was, right? Short yardage, goal line, all those things that are definitely going to be eating into the workload of Tony Pollard. Plus, we saw Tony Pollard just have this crazy efficient year last year in this offense, and we have to expect that to regress as well. So as much as I love Pollard, as much as I love the talent, I do expect a regression in efficiency. I do expect an increase in opportunity. All things considered, he doesn't move up that far in my rankings with the release of Zeke Elliott.
So let's say they don't draft a guy like Bijan, which I actually think Bijan will be gone by the time they draft. I think they'd have to move up to get him. I don't necessarily see that happening. I think when it's all said and done, Bijan's going to go inside the top 15. But let's say they draft a Roschon Johnson type. Let's say they draft a guy in the 3rd round that has potential as like a thumper, maybe potential on the goal line. If they add a guy like that, does that change anything with you with Pollard if it's a rookie, or what are you just pretty dead set on the fact that Dallas is going to utilize a second back kind of between the tackles?
They're going to utilize a second back. Whoever that is to be determined. I think that they'll rely on Pollard a little bit more when it is a rookie. I think it is going to be a rookie. I think they'll definitely utilize that back, but I do think it's going to be someone who can be utilized at the goal line, right? Whether that's Roschon Johnson, whether that's Bijan, whoever that may be, I do think that's going to eat into his efficiency in red zone touches. And overall, it's going to affect his touchdown output, which we all know in the fantasy landscape, touchdowns are king, and they're going to, heavily skew the final results of fantasy points. And I do think, though, that Pollard is going to be the number 1 running back on this team. I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying for people to temper their expectations. I'm not expecting Pollard to come out here and handle 250 carries. Like, that is not the type of back that Tony Pollard is. Tony Pollard is an electric back. He's explosive. He's going to be utilized in the passing game. He's going to mix in on all the 1 and 2 downs. Don't get me wrong. He's still going to be heavily involved in those packages. But if you're expecting 250, 225 plus carries from Tony Pollard, I just don't think it's a realistic approach in having your expectations. Can he hit 200? Of course, but don't expect 250 plus. Like we saw these Zeke years where he was hitting 300, right? And we can't expect that type of usage from Tony Pollard.
I think that the one like X factor for Pollard is, can he see an increased usage in the passing game? Maybe they utilize him a little bit more as a receiver. Dalton Schultz looks to be moving on. They chose Pollard as the franchise tag over Schultz. So that's going to be one less receiver that Dak has familiarity with. We also haven't seen them upgrade the wide receiver 2 spot. Now, there's rumors it could be DeAndre Hopkins, who would obviously command a ton of targets. They could obviously draft a receiver in the NFL draft that could, see a nice target share. They've been connected to some of those guys where they're drafting. But if Pollard can survive through there, and maybe he picks up a few more targets, I think that could be an X factor. When it's all said and done, we're drafting in main events. Where do you see Tony Pollard ending up?
Middle of round 2.
I was going to say that the 2-3 turn, I think it'll be very popular to start out with a Justin Jefferson and then follow up with like a Tony Pollard at that 2-3 turn.
Yeah, I could also see people stacking CeeDee Lamb and Pollard, right? And they're going to take him that middle of round 1 for Lamb, if not the tail end, depending upon the draft, and then come back around and stack him with Tony Pollard. So I expect his ADP to vary significantly, depending upon who lands here. But regardless, we have to expect a committee approach in Dallas, and I think that it's going to be favored in Pollard's. It's going to be in Pollard's favor, I should say. But nonetheless, we're still going to see some sort of committee.
Definitely exciting times in Dallas. Jamaal Williams signs with New Orleans. Another back that we kind of like the landing spot. Alvin Kamara could be suspended. I think he will be suspended to start the season. How long remains to be seen. But Jamaal Williams, it's another back that has had his role change over the last 2 years. We talk about how Detroit did not use him as a receiver. It just didn't happen. They had DeAndre Swift there. But when he was in Green Bay, Jamaal Williams showed that he can be an okay receiver. I believe he went north of 30 receptions back-to-back seasons. He steps into a pretty nice role here in New Orleans. I think he has a chance to be utilized on all 3 downs at certain situations, and we know how efficient he is in short yardage. Your thoughts on Jamaal Williams as he's a Saint?
Yeah, I definitely think that they address the concern. They know that there's that pending or looming suspension for Alvin Kamara. I expect one rather than not expect one. At this point, it's just a matter of how many games are we expecting? Is it 4 games? Is it 6 games? Is it 8 games? There's a lot of questions here. There's a lot of uncertainty is where I'm leading with this. And I think that uncertainty offers up a lot of variance when we look at projections and rankings. And I think that from a projection and ranking standpoint, that uncertainty also is followed by not just one position, but two positions, Alvin Kamara at running back, and also Taysom Hill, who's been utilized as a running back, even though he plays tight end. And so Jamaal Williams made his money last year scoring touchdowns. I think he had 17 touchdowns. Don't quote me on the number, but I think it was around there. I do not expect anywhere near that here inside of this offense, with Derek Carr at helm and the weapons that they have. I think that Jamaal Williams will probably see the majority of the touches here, at least in the rushing share, because when just from a pure raw number standpoint, the suspension is going to reduce the amount of opportunity for Alvin Kamara. That being said, the variance, I think that if Alvin Kamara avoids a suspension, then I think that Jamaal Williams is going to be utilized on short yardage and goal lines only, like we did see him inside of Detroit at times, and that Alvin Kamara would remain the third down back and also, receive the bulk of the touches. The amount of variance that presents itself right now inside this backfield is very tough to pinpoint and project. He moved up in my rankings just because I think that we're going to see a lot of opportunity for Jamaal Williams, but it's tough to pinpoint what that will be.
Are there any other free agent moves that you want to touch on, Billy?
Oh man, there's been so many. I've been updating predictions daily. I'd like to touch base on Baker Mayfield, right? So we look at this one of the best receiving corps in the NFL with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. When we was doing the initial projections with Kyle Trask there, it wasn't looking pretty. And Baker Mayfield by any means isn't a quarterback that I'm excited about to see land inside Tampa, but it is much better in my opinion than seeing Kyle Trask. I definitely think that he'll be willing to throw the ball a little bit more and to be able to at least push the ball a little bit more than Kyle Trask would have been. What that means for this offense is still to be determined, but I definitely think that it kind of cemented my belief in my projections with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, kind of in that, back end wide receiver 2 range. Although I do think that they have the ability to significantly outperform this ADP, and they present themselves as the value inside drafts, especially over at the FFPC. I definitely would like to see what Baker is going to do inside camp before I finalize these projections rankings. There's a lot of time between now and then, but I definitely think that this signing is interesting, at least from a fantasy and rankings perspective.
Yeah, you could say interesting. It doesn't excite me too much. It's a difficult one for you rankers because I don't know. It's, to me, Godwin, it seems like an easier one to project because he can do more around the line of scrimmage, but it's Mike Evans, his streak of touchdowns, his streak of going over 1,000 yards, I think is very, very much in jeopardy. Mayfield was okay on the Rams. Like, he looked decent on the Rams. I think I'll give a credit to McVay for kind of maximizing him. He had some moments, but I am not a fan of the situation. I will say that the one Buccaneer that I think had a positive week was Rachaad White. Rachaad White avoids a number of the free agent running backs that we discussed. Instead, Chase Edmonds ends up in Tampa Bay. I fully expect them to add another back. But the fact that they add Edmonds instead of one of like a Miles Sanders type, kind of speaks volumes to, they seem confident in Rachaad White. I mean, they moved on from Leonard Fournette. They say that it was an amicable split, but if Tampa begged him back with the same job, I think they would have worked things out. It seems like the Rachaad White train might actually be headed out of the station, and it might end up paying off for us because I think he could see a good amount of volume.
Rachaad White was one of my favorite running back prospects last year. I loved him coming out of college, and we saw his role kind of develop as the season progressed last year. Love to see his opportunity inside the passing game. I expect to see a similar output. A lot of this, though, was the amount of attempts that Brady had per game. With Baker Mayfield inserted now as a quarterback, we'll see what that looks like, but I still project him to be pretty heavily used inside the passing game. I like Rachaad White. I like the situation. I do think he's avoided a bullet or to say, but I do think that they're still going to be addressing the position, whether that's going to be continued through free agency or it's going to be in the draft. I don't think that they are done at the position. When you look at the running back room still in free agency, there's still some names to be considered. There's still Kareem Hunt. There's still Damian Harris. Right. We still have Singletary. There's a few names on here, Donta Foreman, that could definitely put a damper in the outlook and projections here for Rachaad White. But nonetheless, it's been a pretty successful first week of free agency for him.
One other name that I wanted to touch on, just because he's very interesting because of the health of Javonte Williams, is Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine ends up in Denver. It's going to be a Sean Payton offense. We've seen running back production come out of that offense over the years. Perine had some very nice weeks when Joe Mixon was out, and on a per-touch basis, he was a productive guy. What are your thoughts on Perine? Let's say that Javonte Williams is going to miss the first half of the season. Is that a player you'd be interested in? Or
I'm so happy you asked this. I was adjusting rankings last night, and I was taking a look at Perine, who when I had adjusted all the numbers and I kind of projected Javonte Williams to be limited, if not miss the first 4 weeks, and Perine came inside my top 30. I'm like, oh boy, that's a little aggressive. So I scaled the numbers back a little bit. Needless to say, he's not inside my top 30 anymore. But you have to like his potential and his outlook here for 2023. I do think he's heavily utilized the first few weeks of the season. Peyton has been known to also utilize 2 backs in his systems. I don't think that's going to change here in Denver. Perine, like you said, has been very efficient, and at times I think looked better than Joe Mixon did inside of the offense when he was with when he's over there last year. We take a look at his targets. I mean, he had 51 targets last year. I mean, people would not think that Perine had that many targets if you just looked and said, if I randomly pop quizzed you, how many targets does Perine have? People would probably guess.
I would say 51.
yeah, of course you would. 51 on the hammer. But most people would probably guess 30, maybe 40 targets, plus you look at his usage in the red zone. It was interesting to see the Bengals 2 years in a row when like the games mattered. Who do they go to? They went to Perine, right? They leaned on him in these do or die situations. It speaks to the level of trust they had for him. They let him go, but I do think that he is a capable back. I think that he is going to be utilized in the same fashion over here in Denver. A lot of this dependent upon Jamaal Williams' health, though. I'm sorry, not Jamaal, Javonte Williams.
No, for sure. But I don't know. To me, the vibes on Javonte Williams are not good right now, health-wise.
No,
I don't think there's a whole lot of optimism there. I mean, you could have a case where they're hoping he's back after about 4 weeks, but sometimes these things can stretch. You might end up with a half season of Samaje Perine. And even if they draft a running back, if it's a committee where Perine's seeing, a good amount of targets, he could have some appeal. He could finish as an RB3 type. So he's definitely an interesting one for me. Billy, right now we are competing against one another in an FFPC never too early $125 best ball tournament. The winner of this tournament ends up taking down $25K. This has been a fun draft so far. We are now, 12 rounds in?
Yep, I think so.
We're 12 rounds in. I selected Trey McBride today. This morning I got my McBride pick in. So we wanted to really kind of get a chance to talk about the builds we're doing right now and maybe a little bit on the strategy that we have taken and kind of critique each other's picks. So let's just dive right into it. The first round, I took Tyrek Hill. What are your thoughts on my Tyrek Hill pick at 6?
I like Tyrek Hill. I actually have him ranked ahead of Cooper Kupp this year. So I would have taken Tyrek Hill as early as 5, if not 4 even, especially in best ball. You got to love the ceiling that we see on a week-to-week basis from Tyrek. So love the Tyrek Hill pick there. Wouldn't change it.
Yeah, that's one where I would consider Tyrek Hill at the 103, which I know that if I had to rank my top 3, he would not be 3rd overall. However, I think that he's closer to the Jefferson Chase tier than the other wide receivers behind him. I mean, I think there's a chance that Tyrek Hill is even better in year 2 of a Mike McDaniel offense. I know he had a tremendous target share. I know things went very well for him this past season in terms of health, but I do think that there's a chance that offense kind of matures and takes the next step, and I think Hill could have a massive year. You selected CeeDee Lamb, who was another player that I would have considered around 6 if Hill was gone. I like your Lamb pick a lot there. I would have Lamb right now ahead of Davante Adams, clearly, because I have some concerns about that Las Vegas offense. And I'd probably have him ahead of Diggs. I love Stephon Diggs. Diggs was your guy last year, but CeeDee Lamb to me is younger. We saw him take that massive step forward last season, finishes as a top 3 wide receiver. He was just dynamite in the second half of the season. So I like your Lamb pick a lot. Maybe you could explain that pick, and were you considering anybody else when you selected Lamb?
No, I was praying that Lamb was going to make it to me. Lamb is my wide receiver 5 right now. I've had the inclination to actually move him ahead of Cooper Kupp with how this Rams offense is starting to shape. We just know that we've seen the Cooper Kupp ceiling, and it's really hard to move him down that far, quite frankly. So as of right now, Lamb's my wide receiver 5. I have him ahead of Stephon Diggs. I have him ahead of Davante Adams, as you just mentioned from your personal belief. We look at his season that he had last year, 156 targets, 107 receptions. He had 17.7 fantasy points per game. That was good for wide receiver 7. He was number 4 in the league in targets. He was, number 9 in the league in target share. He ran the 6th most slot snaps in the entire league. Gotta really, really, really like what we have in Lamb, and I think that he's just going to build upon that in 2023. I don't think I would change anything of where I picked him there.
If Lamb was selected, would you have pushed AJ Brown to that 11 spot?
I probably would have taken Barkley and started off running back and gone back with wide receiver, just because I knew that I would have either gotten Amon-Ra or AJ Brown there on the 2 turn. If they both would have gone back to back, then I would have been SOL, and I probably would have taken, Jaylen Waddle, Garrett Wilson, or even maybe or even Kenneth Walker there.
And then just backtracking, we see the Chase and Jefferson, I think, are going to be the 1-2 when we draft in main events this summer. And they're the 1-2 now. And I think they'll be the 1-2 for a while unless something dramatically changes. Who would be your 103? I brought up the thought of taking Tyrek Hill there. Who would be your 103 right now in an FFPC best ball draft, Billy?
Jamar Chase or Kelce for me. Jefferson to me is 101. I just, again, in his own tier. I think that I said this last year. Upset a lot of people when I said that Justin Jefferson was in his own tier. I still believe he's in his own tier. That tier, I think, is closer with Jamar Chase. Nonetheless, I think that Jefferson is just in a phenomenal situation. They just got rid of Adam Thielen on top of it. There's more opportunity for him to have. I think that Justin Jefferson's in a good spot. Number 2, I think, depending upon your ownership, you can rotate between Jamar Chase, Christian McCaffrey, or Travis Kelce. I'm pretty much insta-locking Christian McCaffrey there every time. And then number 3 rotates pretty frequently between Jamar Chase and Kelce for me.
It's interesting. It's interesting to think about. And I do think that when we get to the end of the summer, it's going to be Chase in that 2 spot just because of the age, the potential for a massive touchdown season, the fact that when you get to FFPC main event drafts, there will be people that don't want to take an older player like Travis Kelce. As great as he is, I think that the age will scare off a few people who just naturally think that a regression year could be coming. It's a debate to be had. I think that clearly McCaffrey has to be ahead of Eckler right now especially with all the trade rumors. I think that's pretty much, you got to go McCaffrey as your RB1 overall, but 3 is definitely, like, to me, a question mark spot. For you, it seems like 2 is a flip-flop, but for me, I'm locked in with those top 2 wideouts, and then 3 I might mix up. If I got the 3rd pick in 5 drafts, I might have 3 different guys. I might have some Tyrek Hill. I might have some McCaffrey. I might have some Kelce. I'm standing on my head if I can get Jamar Chase at the 3.
Yeah, I think it's also important for people to realize that if you continue to get the same spot over and over and over again, you need to diversify. Like, and if you have a lot of Jamar Chase, a lot of Christian McCaffrey, a lot of Travis Kelce, and you like somebody like CeeDee Lamb, I don't care. Take him there and build a diverse team, right? You're going to create something so unique by taking Lamb at 3 and 4 and then combining him with somebody like a Chubb and a Devonta Smith. We're not going to see that in the tournament as much as you're going to see a Christian McCaffrey Devonta Smith team or a Christian McCaffrey and Chubb team. Like, those things are going to be a dime a dozen, right? Where we're going to be able to see uniqueness is when you take players outside of ADP. So don't be afraid to be bullish.
Yeah, especially it's kind of like the stock market. If you have XYZ amount in it, you don't want it to all be in one stock. There's any player in the NFL can get injured, and anybody can have regression. Sometimes, the NFL, if you're a receiver and your quarterback goes down, those guys take a hit. You see different scenarios happen. Maybe an offensive lineman goes down and the entire offensive output regresses. So you definitely don't want to be too invested in the same player, especially in a tournament setting like this. As appealing as Justin Jefferson is, Billy, if you got 5 101s, how many times would you take Justin Jefferson?
I think there's an exception to be made at 101, just because if you want Justin Jefferson, you have to have the 101 or the 102. And 7 out of 10 times you have to have the 101 to have them. So if you join 100 drafts today, the chances of you getting the 101, I'm not a mathematician here, but you're going to you would have to run pretty damn pure to get something of 20 or more in order to get Justin Jefferson over and over again. So where I'm going with this is, if you have the 101, take Justin Jefferson, because if you want exposure to him, you're going to have to take him there.
That makes some sense. So diversify more in the middle of the first or at spots where the tier is equal. Want to move on to the second round here. You took Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 11 spot. I like that pick. Again, that's a guy that I could see in the range of outcomes. I don't think he will be wide receiver 1 overall, but I think that there's a universe where he leads the NFL in receptions. I think that Jameson Williams is actually going to help him. I think having that kind of speed opposite him and that kind of a weapon in the offense is only going to open things up for him underneath more. I like the Amon-Ra St. Brown pick. I could make a argument that Amon-Ra St. Brown belongs in the first round right now, and I think that that'll be a kind of a contrarian pick where some people will push him up into that range as people like him more and more in the summer. Did you consider anybody else at the 11? And is there any? Do you want to kind of talk about your thoughts on St. Brown?
The other person I considered was, of course, Barkley at the. Oh, you mean at the 2-2 is what you're saying?
Yeah,
no,
excuse me, the 2-2. Sorry,
Amon-Ra was an insta lock for me. It was either going to be AJ Brown or Amon or Barkley. I knew I was going to get one of those three. In my rankings right now, I have Amon-Ra directly behind AJ Brown. I have him as my wide receiver 9. I agree with you 100% that I think that them having Jameson Williams be able to stretch the field is only going to open up everything underneath for Amon-Ra St. Brown, especially so they don't have a tight end that's going to eat into those underneath routes. And I think that that's going to only benefit Amon-Ra St. Brown. So love him this year. Love his projections. We were high on him last year as well. And I think that he's going to have another good season. Before we continue, I just want to say, if you have not drafted at the FFWC, make sure to sign up today using code Underworld. New users get $25 off their first team. You can utilize this for the $35 Superflex team. So you can enter into the FFPC today for as little as $10 using code Underworld and play in your first draft today on the FFPC Superflex. Right now, we are talking about the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, never too early. This is a $125 Best Ball Tournament, so you can use this code for $100 off, and there's $25,000 up top. It's a small tournament of only about 1,400 teams, so the chances of you winning are significantly higher than of those other tournaments. So join today using code Underworld at FFPC, and thank you for drafting with us.
Yeah, and it's a no-brainer. You're basically getting an entry into this tournament for $10 if you use our code. And if you want to draft live in Las Vegas, there's no better experience as a fantasy football player at the high stakes level than drafting live at a league like the FFPC. You can draft against Billy and I. Billy and I will be drafting main event teams in Vegas. Shoot us in the DM. We'll try to get in the same draft with you if you want to do that, or just come up and say what's up. But it's highly recommend it. Vegas is awesome. Getting back to this second round, you took Amon-Ra St. Brown, then I took Jaylen Waddle. This Waddle pick, it's interesting. I feel like you start seeing kind of a tier break. I really like the Waddle, Garrett Wilson, and Devonta Smith in kind of this range of the draft. Is there anybody else you would kind of consider there? We don't have to really get into too much of Waddle. I also have had a chance to draft both Miami wide receivers, which as we saw last year, no coach in the NFL does it better than Mike McDaniel in terms of getting two guys a phenomenal target share. So if the offense takes a step forward, I'm looking really good. Even if the offense takes a slight step back, I think I reasonably have two wide receiver ones. Your thoughts, Billy?
Yeah, all three of those guys I have all tiered together: Devonta Smith, Garrett Wilson, and Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle I have at the back end of those three, but nonetheless they should all be mixed in equally, in my opinion. If all three of those guys go, I've been in drafts where all three of those guys go right after AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown. It's just this sea of yellow to begin the second round. I usually lean towards TJ Hockenson or Mark Andrews.
Yeah, that does make some sense. And which one are you on right now as your tight end one, Billy? Or tight end two, excuse me.
Tight end two, I like Hockenson right now, especially after they let Thielen go, the amount of targets that it opened up in this offense. Plus, there's not as much uncertainty, right? Lamar fiasco going on right now. If we knew today Lamar Jackson was 100% going to be the quarterback in Baltimore and him and Mark Andrews tied together, I think that Mark Andrews cements himself as that number two, especially since they lack receivers and other weapons. But Hockenson, with the amount of targets that we saw down the stretch, the target share that I'm expecting for him in 2023, I think that is definitely up for debate if he's going to be the number two or number three tight end for the season.
And then what did you think about my third round selection, Billy?
Who was it? Chris Olave? Yeah. You sniped me on Chris Olave. Love Chris Olave there. Question for you. If Higgins would have been there, who would you have gone, Higgins or Olave?
So I've gone both ways on this one. I believe in our hardway draft, I took T. Higgins ahead of Olave. I don't know. For me, I think Olave at the end of the day is going to have more targets, and he's also a clear number one in his offense. As much as I like T. Higgins, the talent, he's number two to Chase. So, and you're great about this, Billy, in our conversations. When I get these top 3 round wide receivers, as good as a guy like Higgins is, he's going to need an outsized number of touchdowns to really have that massive season. Olave could do it with a lot more volume, which I think he's going to get with Derek Carr. Where are you at on those two?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think this is a classic debate of touchdowns or receptions, and I'm always going to go for the person who's going to have more opportunity. I definitely think, though, that Michael Thomas re-signing it doesn't necessarily hurt Olave, but I was expecting Thomas to move on and that there to be this massive target share distribution between Olave and potentially Rashid Shaheed and of course the running backs. But now that Thomas is back, Thomas will never be what we saw the year where he led the league in receptions. I think that version of Michael Thomas is long gone. Nonetheless, I still think it is another person that's going to be competing for targets in this offense. I still like Olave ahead of Tiggins because Tiggins. That's a good nickname of T. Higgins. But I think Olave, just from a data perspective, I think he's going to have more opportunity than T. Higgins. But it's very well possible that Higgins is going to outproduce him in the touchdown category.
So we're coming up on an hour here, Billy. I'd love to get into the fourth round. I think we've got a chance to do that next week at some point, talk about the final build. One question in the chat: with the new offense and pace, do you have any questions about the new offense and pace in Dallas this year under the new offensive coordinator, Schottenheimer? Do you think that they could be a little slower than a Kellen Moore offense, or do you think it's going to be pretty similar?
Whether it's slower or not, we still have Lamb, who's going to be the number one target in this offense. We now have no Ezekiel Elliott, so they're not going to be able to just completely rely on the run game and pound the ball. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more. who that running back 2 is, I think will determine the overall pace of this offense and how they are going to distribute run to pass. I still think, though, we see a heavier pass offense this year than we have in the past, and that CeeDee Lamb is going to be at the forefront of that. They're still in the market for another receiver. We're hearing the name Odell Beckham now being tossed around as of last night. I think that would do CeeDee Lamb well, because now he's not going to be double covered as much, and so that's going to open up the field a little bit more for Lamb. So I am looking forward to them having another addition to this team. To answer the question long-windedly, I think that they're going to have a little bit more pass volume.
Awesome, Billy. This was a very, very fun show. Why don't you let everybody know when they can see you on the Dominator and anything else you have coming up?
Yeah, the Dominator will go live tomorrow. I recorded right before this show. I recorded with Dave Richards from CBS. I'm going to do some editing, get that published. It'll air tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern. So as at the typical time that Matt and I normally record. That'll go live tomorrow. Keep an eye out for it on YouTube. I'll also do a post on Twitter if you're on Twitter, and then that way you can keep your eyes and ears open for that. Like I said earlier, the rankings have been updated daily. We have the best ball rankings updated this morning. We have the FFPC, dedicated FFPC rankings updated this morning. And we also have the seasonal rankings updated this morning as well. Those are also super flex as well as tight end premium. So any format that you're in, they are all updated and ready to rock and roll for your drafts if you're drafting today. So yeah, I think that's it, Theo.
Yeah, and you can find me on the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast with Matt Kelly on Tuesdays. We've done 2 of them so far. It's been awesome. A lot of people listening in on this definitely play Dynasty. It's a busy time of year for the Dynasty player. We're about 6 weeks out from our rookie drafts, Billy. So it's very, very exciting. And then next week, definitely tune back. Billy and I will be back again, our usual time on Thursdays, and we're going to have a special edition of First Class Fantasy. We're going to have our first guest that we've ever had. We're going to start mixing in some guests over the next couple of weeks, and we've got a very good one next week. JJ Zachariason will be joining us. We're going to talk a lot about this rookie class, the incoming rookie class, and also the sophomore class, the Garrett Wilsons, the Ken Walkers, the Chris Olaves, and some of the guys that JJ is very bullish on. So that is going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Looking forward to meeting JJ Zachariason. I've actually never had an opportunity to meet him or actually to work with him. So this will be my first interaction with JJ Zachariason. So good get, Theo. I'm excited for that show and excited to break down some of the sophomores.
Awesome. Well, everybody have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining us on First Class Fantasy.
We'll see you next week, folks. Bye-bye.